Hi, everybody. Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to the Joe Chaffee Weather Show. Sorry I wasn't able to do a live stream last night, but still a little bit on the busy side, dealing with some personal issues with a friend of mine who had to have some surgery. He's recovering nicely, and everything is going well on that end. So we are very, very happy about that. And thank you for the kind thoughts. And by the way, the chairman is not here tonight, Scott Briller. He's taking care of his mom, who's not feeling well. So we wish him the best, and we certainly wish his mom the very best and a speedy recovery. Let me remind you, um, just really quick before we get started, if you haven't downloaded the Meteorologist Joe Chaffee weather app, which is absolutely free, here is your chance to do it on after the live stream on Google Play or on the App Store, and this way you can follow along with the developments of the storm. And one of the features that is on the app is the Zoom radar, which is very useful. You can pretty much, this is just a shot, an old shot, but there are a lot of options here with regards to putting in watches and warnings. You see the menu on the side, the current temperature, the winds, and also the severe weather when it happens. You can't even get severe weather reports, and you can move this radar as tight or as wide as you need it to be. Again, it's absolutely free on Google Play and on the App Store. And if you're on Google Play, by the way, download also Angry Ben's weather app, the Angry Weatherman. And pretty soon there should be an iPhone version for that. Okay, so we've got a major storm that is moving up the East Coast, and it's going to have different impacts in different areas. Some areas, the impacts will be strong, in other areas, perhaps a little bit less so. I think that Long Island and southern New England in particular, and southeastern New England, are probably going to see the worst of this with regards to wind and rain and coastal flooding. And with respect to coastal flooding, let me just point out that there's one tide cycle tomorrow evening into tomorrow night that's going to come as the storm is moving northward, where you're going to have a southeast wind. And that will be, I think, the one tide that will be problematic. Tides are running high tonight because we're still dealing with the full moon, which was on Sunday, but the tide heights are dropping. The astronomical high tides are dropping with each successive high tide. So that is good. After tomorrow night's high tide, we will see northwest winds behind it. The storm will be up in New England, and tidal flooding will be reduced considerably, or even taken down to no tidal flooding at all when it comes to Thursday. So let's get started here on the satellite views tonight. We're seeing the pieces of this particular puzzle coming together, and we're going to start with the eastern satellite loop. And it is still clear from Maine down into northern Virginia, starting to see a little bit of the northern edge of the high clouds moving across Virginia, and the heavier overcast that's down into North and South Carolina. And it's in South Carolina and Georgia in particular that we are beginning to see the first rounds of rain. And here it is on the wide U.S. satellite view, and you see that moisture that is streaming across the south. This has been very good news today, by the way. Remember, this area across the southern part of the United States, south of 35 degrees north in particular, excuse me, has been baked considerably from heat that lasted through much of September and into the early part of October. And there was very little rain outside of just some scattered thunderstorms from time to time, very little in the way of rain that occurred. So getting a widespread rain today has been a very good thing, and we'll see it on the radar momentarily. But it's the water vapor imagery tonight that is really very fascinating, very fascinating indeed, and a very useful tool. This is the mid-level water vapor, so kind of gives an average look with regards to what's going on near the surface and what's going on upstairs. And there are two things that are very important here with the developing system that we're going to be dealing with. And the first is, of course, you've got this southern jet that is bringing all this moisture that you see across from Mexico right through Texas and into the southeastern part of the United States. That's been streaming through all day long. But take a look right up here. This is the powerhouse upper trough that is, you see how it's pushing southeastward. It's digging southeastward. It's what we call it when these systems swing around and start to dive. There, it's digging southeastward. The whole base of that trough, if you watch how it evolves on the water vapor imagery, it sinks southward. It's not swinging. There is some eastward component of motion, but there's more movement southeast than it is due east. So what will happen is that as this whole thing swings eastward and makes its way toward the east coast tomorrow, this upper feature is going to pick up this and just shoot it right up the eastern seaboard. So you're going to have this all pretty much wrapping around the upper low when it gets further east into the eastern part of the Great Lakes. So it's all the pieces are here with regards to a storm, a major developing storm. You're going to see a low that's going to probably a surface low that's going to emerge somewhere near the Carolina coast and then move very rapidly northeastward. Basically, that upper low is just going to pull it right up, and the whole trough is going to swing all the way around to what we call a negative tilt, a northwest southeast tilt to that trough, and that is just going to create all sorts of energy for this thing to feed on and intensify fairly rapidly during the day tomorrow. Now, here's the radars loading up. Here's all that rain across the south from East Texas through much of Louisiana, much of Mississippi and Alabama. I'm sure Jess Harden, if he comes on tonight, will tell you that at least he's gotten some rain out of this, and he's going to be a happy camper. And then we have the rain that is in Georgia, and now starting to see some echoes moving up into South Carolina. Not seeing that northward component of motion yet. We're still waiting for the upper trough to dive a little bit further to the southeast, the one up moving into the western lakes. Seeing a little bit of shower and thunderstorm activity in parts of Missouri and into southern Illinois, southern Indiana. And if you'll notice on the radar that we see up near the Great Lakes, some pretty hefty showers and some heavy downpours and even a thunderstorm or two up there in northern Michigan. You see how the radar is that twist, okay? The echoes have that counterclockwise look to it, that comma signature. So the radar certainly telling you here that we've got this impressive trough in the northern part of the jet stream that is going to wreak havoc for tomorrow. The surface map tonight, pretty quiet here along the east coast. Of course, we've got the center of a high sitting off the New Jersey coast. Cold front that is well offshore from yesterday, stalled along southern Georgia, across the Florida Panhandle, and then through Louisiana. And just north of that, you're getting that overrunning precip. 80s to the south, 70s and 60s up to the north. And here's your northern feature, where you have a low in eastern Michigan that is moving southeastward, and this is all part of that upper low. By the way, you'll notice you've got temperatures as of 5 p.m. On the 21Z map pushed 70s up into Virginia and even into parts of Maryland, 70s. And behind this front, we've got temperatures in the 40s and even a few 30s showing up. It's not Arctic air, but it's certainly air that's cold enough that is coming down on the backside. And it's one of the trigger mechanisms that you look for when you see the surface trying to set up with respect to this developing storm. Now, here's the NAM. I've already got it a little bit too far into Thursday, so we're going to back it up, and I'm going to bring up the wider view here. And by the way, for those of you watching in other parts of the U.S., I'll bring up the full U.S. view a little bit later on so we can take a look at weather around the rest of the country. So the NAM model, this is the one from late this afternoon. By tomorrow morning, we've got rain moving into Virginia, North Carolina. There's not a lot of it, but it's the area that you see near South and North Carolina with a little bit of thunderstorm activity there. It's right in here that we're going to see the surface low take shape on the basically it's going to wind up being a low that's going to intensify on the point of occlusion. The front itself with the northern low is right about the radar echoes here really kind of pick it out pretty well. But you can see that there's the front, and it gets all the way down into Texas. And right in here is where you're going to see your coastal low that's going to start to develop and move northward as we go through the day. And I'll just move it on. This is at noon for tomorrow. You start to see that rain area expanding across Virginia. And you just have still just that hit right in here. You see that little curl, that thunderstorm curl there. You've got the front back through here with some heavier rains ahead of that front, and maybe even a thunderstorm or two in western New York, western Pennsylvania, down into western Virginia. And then this is where you really start to see the blossoming out. During late tomorrow afternoon and tomorrow evening, that coastal low starts to get going. And for the folks that are up, say, from northern New Jersey and northeastward and through New England, you're going to catch the pressure falls here. This thing is going to drop about 20 millibars from tomorrow afternoon. You're going to see pressures drop from about 995, 996 down to the upper 970s and maybe even down to about 975. And that's if you're in the area that's experiencing those rapidly falling pressures in a situation like this, this is where you wind up getting the worst weather in terms of rain and in terms of wind. Now, this is at 8 o'clock tomorrow night. The back edge of this moves very quickly, by the way. You notice that it's about a 6 to 8 hour event with regards to the rain, the heavy rains. It's this big arm that comes around and lifts up. So it'll rain hard. If you put down a couple of inches of rain in 6 to 7 hours, you're going to wind up with some flooding. And there are the beginnings of a few flash flood watches up. I know that they put them up for northeastern New Jersey. They didn't put them up for anywhere else yet. But I suspect tomorrow morning you may wind up seeing more areas under a flash flood watch, particularly in New England, where during the early morning hours on Monday, this thing is going to go to town with some heavy rains. There's your low at 2 a.m., a 980 low. I think it might be a little deeper than that, sitting southeast of Montauk. And now we go to three hourly jumps on the NAM. It's when you look at the NAM model on tropicaltidbits.com, it's in 1 hour increments through 36 hours, and then it jumps to 3 hour increments. So it looks like it's moving faster. It really isn't. We're just missing the 2 hours in between. By 5 a.m., you have a 977 or a 979-ish low. So let's say, just for compromise, about a 975 to 980 low sitting near Providence, Rhode Island. Heavy rains for Massachusetts, the rains pulling out of Connecticut and into Maine. And then you're going to get a big arm that's going to sweep up into Maine, and heavy rains back into northeastern New York State. And I do see a little blob of blue there, maybe in some high elevations up in the Adirondacks, get a little wet snow in the mix on Thursday morning. Who knows? But your low is going to be up in Vermont, New Hampshire by midday Thursday. And now the pressure gradient is very tight behind it. You've got a ton of isobars here between the low and that 1022 high that's in Missouri. So all through this area here, you are looking at winds that are going to be from the northwest, and they are going to be on the gusty side. I don't know why is maybe that's why. Somehow I got the color white. White drawing on white doesn't really show well. but you're going to have, here's your tight pressure gradient on the west side. So this is why we're not going to see, by the way, any coastal flooding, because with that northwest wind is just going to push all that water out. And again, the one high tide tomorrow evening is the one that I think is going to be a big problem. You are going to have south and southeast winds coming into coastal Maine in the meantime during Thursday morning. So there will be some tidal impacts there. I'm not really familiar with how the tidal impacts are for the coast of Maine. So for those of you that are watching, you know your area better than I do, and so do your local National Weather Service folks. So be sure to check weather.gov for the latest weather information. Now, ahead of it tomorrow, the gradient starts to tighten up during tomorrow afternoon and evening over southern New England, Long Island, back to about coastal New Jersey. And you see it gets pretty strong here when the low gets close. So there probably will be some wind gusts from central and eastern Long Island and from central and eastern Connecticut eastward into southeastern New England of gusts to up to 50 miles an hour. Would not be a shocker to me at all. Now, with respect to New Jersey and points south, your wind shift occurs fairly early in the game here. So by tomorrow evening, winds have already gone around to the northwest from central New Jersey down into Virginia. So this will probably help you out, and you may be already past your high tide, but check your tide times for sure. And that will also limit the amount of coastal flooding in that particular area. So just again, check with your local National Weather Service office regarding that. And then it lifts up. It's going to spend the day in New England on Thursday and then start to move northeastward from there and begin to weaken. So we're seeing this reach its peak intensity pretty much right overhead and into the northeast and then out. And meanwhile, for those in the mid-Atlantic states and points south, the dry air is going to come all the way down into the southeast, and that's good. This is going to have impact. The front gets pretty far to the south here, gets down into at least north central Florida. So this storm is going to create a really good push of dry air going fairly far south into the southeast and north Florida. And I know you folks that live down in that part of the country like to see those dry air masses come down any time of year, but this time of year at least you start to see them happening a bit more frequently. Just want to point out that, and we'll come back to this a bit later, you'll notice that in the southwestern Gulf on the lower left, that is from disturbed weather that is in the southern Caribbean, that some of it is forecast to move into the Bay of Campeche. So we'll keep an eye on this in case something decides it wants to develop over the weekend. I haven't really given that part of the equation a good look today, to be perfectly honest. So we'll look at it together in a little bit and see what that has to say. When that could have some implications with moisture coming into the southeastern part of the United States, maybe later in the weekend and early next week with the next weather front that is due to arrive. The GFS, let's take a look at the GFS, and then we'll take a look at the European. The models are all about the same with this. The only difference that I noticed, at least with respect to the GFS, is the GFS is a little bit faster getting that rain northward and a little bit more robust. So it's got rain already east of New York City by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So a little bit faster than the NAM. Yankee fans, you might have a problem tomorrow because at 8 o'clock there's still, even on the faster GFS, there's heavy rain going on. So I'm thinking that they may not have the game tomorrow night. That's my guess. Unless this thing really rockets northeastward and the rain shuts off faster. But the faster GFS still has rain at 11 o'clock. I'm sorry, at 11 o'clock tomorrow night, it's probably coming to an end. But at 8 o'clock, it's still heavy rain down into central New Jersey with lighter rains into South Jersey. And then by 2 a.m., it's not that far off to where the NAM is at 1 a.m. The lows are fairly close to each other. But the bulk of the rain is over from New York City, south and west, really raining very heavily across much of New England here. and then that heavy rain sweeps up into Maine and into and into Vermont and New Hampshire. And then Thursday afternoon, you still have this wrapped up low sitting right along the Maine coast. Pressures are starting to go up, so we've reached the peak intensity, and then it heads on up into Nova Scotia as a much weaker cyclone. By the way, notice on the GFS on the lower left, you've got what it sees as a system coming out of the southwest Gulf, heading northeastward toward the Florida Panhandle and into the southeast by Saturday afternoon. So it's even faster bringing that in. And then it brings it slowly up the coast on Sunday before it moves it out to the northeast. I'm not 100% sure that's correct. It might be. Sometimes when stuff goes into the Bay of Campeche, it's so far south that you really need a fairly deep trough to try to bring it up toward the U.S. There's a long history of storms that form down there that look like they're going to move northward, and they wind up staying trapped. So this could be a bit of a rush on the GFS's part if something were to come out of there. But it certainly would. The GFS raises an eyebrow here with that particular system. Now the European, which we don't really have the in-betweens to look at, and I will we'll switch to the normal anomaly on the surface. You'll see it better here. So we're only seeing this in 24-hour increments. So you're going to miss the whole period from Wednesday, between Wednesday 8 a.m. and Thursday 8 a.m. And it's already up in the Gulf of Maine there on Thursday 8 a.m. It's a little faster than the GFS is. Then the GFS is faster than the NAM. But if you notice the isobars down in North and South Carolina down to Georgia, they're all bagged in there. So the probability, the surface low is probably getting going, starts to get going somewhere in here, and then you're missing the in-between. It kind of tracks like this. So it's still, you're going to wind up with the same outcome with regards to the wind, rain, and coastal flooding. And then Friday morning, it's still pretty breezy from New England down to about Maryland. And after that, the winds will start to relax as the high moves along the coast. You'll notice that the European, by the way, does have something here in the Gulf of Mexico, some sort of low trying to develop early Saturday morning. It's much further west than the GFS, and it actually brings it into northern Alabama. The European always likes to be further left with these sorts of things, and we're setting up now for the next system on Monday because we have the next trough coming in here. There's your next cold front with a low sitting in southern Minnesota, and here's what's left of the Gulf low that's moving northeastward. So if you look at this, you would probably argue that there could be some rain north and east of there coming up the coast for Sunday night and Monday. So something we're going to have to watch. The next system goes up toward the Great Lakes on Tuesday. So that brings another cold front through. Very, very active pattern indeed that is developing here for the longer term. Okay, I did promise that we're going to look at the whole U.S., so let's do that. And we'll go back to the GFS. And for some folks, you might ask, well, how come I spend so much time with the GFS? And it's because of the fact that the GFS, in its longer view, does offer us a look at where all the precip is, which the European, we can't see that. Okay, so it's not so much. It's not really an over dependence on my part on the GFS. It's more that I have something to show you. It's a much better visual to look at the GFS surface with the precip on it than without it. So there's our storm. It goes out. There's your Gulf flow that comes out and moves northeastward. And meanwhile, out in the west, we've got the next energy coming into the northwest, and it brings a little bit of snow there into Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. And then some snows that move, scattered snows that move into Wyoming and parts of Colorado. Doesn't look like much of a big deal. But there's your next low for Monday and moving into the western lakes with the trailing cold front getting here Tuesday sometime. The models have been kind of weird with this. So some runs have had this front here as early as Monday evening. Now this latest run on the GFS is slower, matches up a bit better, I guess, with the European, and then out it goes. And meanwhile, here comes another system that comes into the west that moves across Canada and continues to the east. And here we go again, if this is right, with another system in the long range about day 9 or 10. The pattern, we've been talking about the trough coming into the eastern part of the United States, and it's doing that. It's one after another after another. Think back to last week, okay? I'm going to see if we could show a comparison here. If you remember last week, how the GFS in particular was trying to drop a cutoff low into the southwest and bringing an upper high in the eastern part of the United States. Well, not quite the case. The trough does not cut off in the southwest. Yes, you do have ridging here this weekend, but with each successive run, that ridge is getting less and less impressive. It tries to build upper high there in southern Florida, but the next trough's already swinging into it, and it weakens by the time we get to Monday night and Tuesday. So it doesn't really have a chance to build up the eastern seaboard like some of the models were doing back last week. I'm going to see if we can, I'm going to go back to last Friday, see if that's far enough. You see the difference here, folks, from last week? This is what the model was forecasting for this coming Sunday, the southwest cutoff. Okay, so this is for Monday, Monday, October 21st. Ridge, big cutoff high along and just off the east coast of the United States, deep upper low in the southwest. But you know, I had a lot of skepticism about that when I saw that when we were talking about this last week. And you'll note, look at the difference. This is for the same time frame. Okay, this is another one of endless examples that I've shown over time where you got to be really careful when you look at these long range and the long range because of how different reality winds up being. Again, just go back to last Friday, showing the forecast for this coming Monday. This is what the upper air is supposed to look like. And what I can do is I will draw the upper air here. Hang on one second. Why can't I should be able to do this without the mouse. Nope, that's not what I wanted to do. Hang on. There, let's see if this works. Okay, so this is, I'm drawing in the jet stream pattern, and then when we look at the reality, you're going to see the big difference. Okay, west to east flow across New England. This would have been pretty mild. Okay, now let's move this and let's switch back to the very latest run. Hang on, here we go. Switching back to the very latest run. Look at the difference, folks. Look at that. Look at how different the model is now compared to what it was. About the only thing that's even remotely close is the high, and the high is much further south and much weaker along the eastern seaboard. No cutoff in the southwest, where you have this westerly flow from the Dakotas to New England. You have a deep upper low sitting over Minnesota, and that is going to be pushing eastward. Now watch the pattern over the long haul. All right, so let me just back this up. We'll start with just as Melissa was being kicked out. So that upper low goes up into Canada. Here comes your digger for our storm for tomorrow. Wrapping up. Look at how negative the trough goes. It swings all the way around. That is really impressive as it lifts up to the northeast eventually, because it's a progressive pattern. Everything is moving from west to east. So we see improving weather conditions Friday, Saturday, and into Sunday, unless that system in the tropics gets involved, in the Bay of Campeche gets involved. And here comes your next deep trough for early next week to bring a cold front through here along about Tuesday. Then that moves out, and look at this. Here comes the next one right behind it that digs down into and goes negative. In fact, if you want to believe it, now this is out by day 11. Remember, the same principle that applied to that ridge on that model run that we showed you late last week will probably apply to this in subsequent runs. But the model's been fairly consistent with continuing to bring troughs into the eastern part of the United States. Perhaps Typhoon Hagibis, by when recurving and going into the Gulf of Alaska, has created a longer period where you're going to get these troughs coming into the eastern part of the U.S. and that jet goes all the way down into the Gulf of Mexico if that is the case. And by the way, if you look at the GFS latest run for next Friday, and you look at the European run for next Friday, they're not terribly different. The European has a stronger ridge building up along the east coast ahead of that next trough and a strong ridge along the west coast. So ridges on both coasts and a trough in the middle. But the trough in the middle is going to be moving eastward. So this is just going to bring another front through here. Very, very active weather pattern for sure in the longer term. I will show you for you block lovers that the European does build a strong ridge over Greenland in the latter part of the forecast period, and so does the GFS, by the way, even stronger. It actually cuts off a high between Iceland and Greenland and has ridging holding there for the most part through its long-range forecast period, even though it does weaken somewhat and slides to the east, but it does have higher than normal pressures up in the North Atlantic, at least through the middle part of the forecast period. Whether that is real or not remains to be seen. It might, the European is suggesting that it is a bit overdone, but the overall flavor of this is trough at 160, which, if you're looking, when you look at these things in terms of action in the eastern part of the United States, if you've got a trough at 160, which is the longitude of Hawaii, so running from the Aleutians right straight down, so you've got this mess out here, that promotes a ridge up the west coast, promotes a trough down into the eastern part of the United States, and then some kind of a ridge out in the Atlantic. And that is, we have this signature here that's somewhat on the blocky side at around day 9, day 10. And I did bring up, for your enjoyment, the teleconnections tonight. So while we have this mess going on in the eastern part of the U.S. with this particular system, we do notice this is based on the 0Z run from last night, that we have the Pacific North America Index, which goes strongly negative toward the end of this week, actually then shoots rapidly up to the neutral line this weekend, and then goes positive for the last 7 or 8 days of October. We obviously doesn't go beyond that. And the North Atlantic Oscillation, the NAO, actually goes negative starting tomorrow. It's not strongly negative, it's somewhat negative right through the forecast period. For you snow lovers, you want to get this EPO index down at least to the neutral line, or to get it down into negative territory. And it does, it is strongly positive now, but it does go toward neutral toward the latter part of the forecast period. Now, if we start to see that go negative, that would be a sign of colder air coming into the eastern part of the United States. Let me see what their Hurricane Center is talking about with respect to the tropics. Now, we do have Tropical Depression 15. We talked about this a few days ago, that system that is near the Cabo Verde Islands, and that's a non-factor really because that's going to be gone in another day or so, and it's going to move northward and goodbye. This thing is so far to the east. It's already moving northwest at 9, so we really don't care about that. And here's the system that came out of the Southwest Caribbean and is going into the Western Gulf of Mexico. Now, the Hurricane Center has upped its probability here to 40% chance of development. It does say some gradual development is possible once the system moves back out over the open waters in the Southwest Gulf, and a tropical or subtropical cyclone could form late this week or this weekend in the Western Gulf of Mexico. Just want to take a look. Let me bring up the, let me just get rid of this for a moment. Let's go to this view. I'm going to do just real quick. Let's see what kind of upper air conditions we have in the Western Gulf. That's too far out into the long range, so let's go back. And okay, so you do actually have right now very light winds in the Western Gulf of Mexico, and there is a bit of an upper air anticyclone that moves into the Southwest Gulf. See that does spark a low that develops in that environment and then moves out to the northeast. So the conditions actually are going to be somewhat favorable, I think, for development later this week and going into this weekend. Something I think we should probably keep an eye on going forward with whatever gets down there in the Southwest Gulf. But remember, it gets kind of tricky down there because sometimes those systems do get trapped. It does seem when we look at the upper flow that it's actually turning north and northeast across the Western Gulf of Mexico. So anything that does develop here, take it right here, there's this upper low that is moving across Texas late this week, and it creates a westerly flow across the Gulf of Mexico. So it would seem to argue, in my view, that if you do wind up seeing something trying to develop in the Southwest Gulf, that it's going to do something like this. The European suggests more of a westerly track, so let's take a look at why that's the case. Okay, so now the European has that upper low, but it weakens it much faster. So the flow actually is a little bit more southwest here. So that would kind of argue that if something does come out of the out of that part of the Gulf of Mexico, that you're going to wind up maybe having it a little bit further to the west before it makes the turn. Something like this, perhaps. And the GFS would be something like this. Okay, so that would be the two differences. The error is that you're seeing between the two models is actually quite typical of what you would normally see when you're dealing with the European and the GFS. So I'm going to come back to the chat board here. So just give me 1 second to set up. And hang on. Here we go. Let's do this. Let's get this back here so we don't need that anymore. So I hope everybody has had a great day and a great couple of days since I did miss you guys last night. And of course, remember, there's always weather in 5, and you Patreon members get weather in 10. And for those of you who want to join the Patreon platform, there's a link on the descriptor to this live stream. It's just $2 a month, and you get a lot of extra weather, and you can message me anytime. Hey, Steve LaPointe, thank you so much for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Izzy D was wondering if you have anything to say regarding the pattern. Whoops. Say regarding the pattern that we are in now. I know that the storm predicted, however, it's been fairly dry. The pattern I think is going to hold for much of the rest of the month. We're going to have a few more weather systems to deal with along the way. I suppose you could look at this and say, I know some of you have mentioned this. You know, you look at what's happening, and if you're a winter weather lover, you're probably gaining some encouragement. And I won't discourage you from feeling that way. I would just say, though, you'll have to wait to see. We really don't have any kind of Canadian connection here, so that's why you're not seeing any snow anywhere out of this. The area isn't that particularly cold, but perhaps if we set up something with a Canadian connection getting involved and bringing down some colder air. Who knows what by the time we get to the end of October and the beginning of November, at least not the I-95 corridor, please, but inland spots. Temps last week of the month going to be cold for Floridian, Steve LaPointe. Yeah, especially if you get that trough. The trough in the east is there, and that trough gets very deep, and you're pushing cold fronts all the way down. Yeah, add a little Canadian connection to that, and you're going to have some nice cool air going into the southeastern part of the United States and into Florida. John Minelli, residential sanitation here. Oh, right, trucks in snow, scary. Little early, got a lot of time to prep. You don't have to worry too much about that right now. Let's not have another. Let's not have another. Mid-November, early season snowfall to deal with. I'd rather kind of wait till we get to December. Am I going to start doing Patreon live streams again after November 15th? Izzy, let's see how it goes. You know what? I will certainly have the opportunity and the time to do it, the live streams. I want to save them for when they're really relevant. If there's a storm going on, I certainly will be able to pop up those live streams for the Patreon platform. But I don't want to just kind of do it every day when there's not much really going on. Weather in 10 will cover it certainly on most days. But when conditions warrant, I will jump a live stream on to Patreon for members only. Let's see. Timothy Veltman talked of a deformation zone with this storm. Okay, hang on one second. So usually on the deformation zone, hang on 1 minute. Let me just see if I have a little more time. I could probably show you a better example. So hang on one moment here. Give me a minute. Hang on, folks. All right. All right. So for those of you who don't know, I'm going to read a definition here. And it's something you usually see during the winter time. And you get these zones where you start to see things band up in these storms. You get banding of the precip. And in the winter time, when that happens, of course, you're dealing with storms. And if you go to one of the local National Weather Service office pages, you can read a bit more about how they work. But with respect to this particular storm system, let me bring up the NAM. I'll do the NAM 3 because the NAM 3 kilometer is probably a better tool when it comes to this. So we'll get the region back up into the northeast, and we'll bring up the NAM 3, and oh, now the new NAM is beginning, by the way. So I'll have to go back one run. And the NAM 3 today, by the way, was pretty crazy with what it did with this. Let's take a look at the NAM 3. Right in here's that low, just really wrapped up. So you can see how the precip on the radar representation, you have this these bands that develop here of very heavy rains to the north and east of the center, and then it moves on up. And usually when it comes to snow, if you take a look here at this point when the low is up in Boston, let's assume that the air were cold enough, you would probably have bands that form. Oh, I did that again. Sorry. You would probably have you have this one band over here. You've got another band that's like that. You got another band like this. So this is where you'd have the deformation zones where you start to see the precip banding up. And if you are in between them, you don't get you get much less. You're not shut out. But if you get under those bands, and I've seen that happen on Long Island and in New Jersey in some cases, but I've seen it happen on Long Island a number of times. For some reason, those deformation bands have a tendency to set up right over my house. And as a result, I'm sitting with heavy snow, and in some of the bigger snowstorms that have produced 20 or more inches for me, if you go a handful of miles on either side of that, the snow amounts are 30 to 50% less. And then you go to the next band and then they go back up again. So it's kind of like you have hills and valleys in terms of what results with respect to snowfall. Okay, so silly me, didn't have the map up. Let's try it again. All right, sorry about that. I have to put a little post-it note up here to say, well, make sure that you bring map up to front of screen. So here's the old NAM3, and here we go. And here's your low. You see how the precip starts banding up, and in those snow areas on the west side, you start to get bands that form like this. Okay, and if you're inside those bands, you get clobbered. If you're on either side of that, you get less clobbered. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. By the way, in terms of rainfall, I mean, this is what the NAM3 produces. And I think that, one of the things the NAM3 suggests for tomorrow, by the way, is that there will be some convective action in here with respect to some thunderstorms. So there might be some variation in terms of the rainfall amounts. But you can see here, even on the NAM3, you see how the precip, you got this heavy precip here in eastern New Hampshire and in Maine. And then there's this narrow band. There's also some, probably getting some mountain, you're getting some mountain effect here. But if you go back into New York, you go from the white to the purple. So you get, that's the banding that is occurring. By the way, the 10-meter wind ought to be a gem to look at on the NAM3. Let's go really close up. And I'll try to get this so we can see the time a bit better. So this is at 10 o'clock tomorrow night. And you guys are seeing it nice, good. So 10, 11, 12, there's your low. And the reddish areas, you start to get closer to those reddish areas, and you're talking about sustained winds of 40 knots over eastern Long Island and then coming into southeastern New England. In and around Boston, I mean, that's right, you get clobbered there with some 50-mile-an-hour sustained winds, and that purple is between 50 and 60 just offshore, touching the coast of Maine. And then, of course, as the low weakens, the wind field weakens. Notice, by the way, on the backside on Thursday, over Long Island and Long Island Sound, back over to the Jersey coast, you do have these sustained winds of 30 to 40 knots. So it certainly would argue that inland areas, you got the green showing up there, inland 20 to 30, and I think that will probably produce wind gusts of 40 miles an hour or more. Just want to take a look. Let's go to the NAM12, see how far out it's not out far enough yet. The old GFS, from the standpoint of precip, from this, and I'll use the wide view. So for those of you who are watching in the southeast, you can see the impact of the rains from today, 2 or more inches in a fairly large area, and in the northeast, 2, 3, some 3-inch amounts, northern New Jersey through New England and over into Maine. And of course, then you've got the lesser amounts in a few places, but even the precip shield, the way it's setting up, you kind of can see the somewhat of a banding nature here that is taking place. Very, very interesting. The NAM12, in terms of precip, on the old run, because the new run is coming out, so we don't have enough of it yet. I mean, the NAM, the 12-kilometer NAM is very bullish. I mean, I would argue for a large area of 2 to 4 inch rains through all of this. So looks like we're going to have a rocky Wednesday, a later Wednesday into Wednesday night for sure. Hang on, let me just bring you back. Get this, make this go away. Move that to the bottom. I think it's a pretty good bet that the Yankees aren't going to play. Izzy, thank you for hitting Super Chat. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Kyle, can you get the precip maps for the Euro if you buy Weather Bell? I still won't be able to show them if I did. I actually do have access to the European in between the in between hours and the precip maps. But I can't show them because of because the European is not a government produced product; it's a privately produced product, and as a result, I can't you can't show them on air. They get upset, and in fact, even some of the government produced products like the UKMet and when I put up Met Iran when we talk about weather in Ireland. They have strict restrictions as to what you can show, and I have emailed both of those offices asking if I can show it on my program, and I never heard a response. So I don't like to do it unless they. I don't like to put stuff up unless I have some kind of permission from the folks. I certainly would give them credit for it. It's like with tropicaltidbits.com, which is a great website. And thanks to Levi Cowan for letting us use the models on air. And that is, in my opinion, probably the best site when it comes to having all the models in one place. Are the leaves going to get ripped off the trees? I imagine they would, Reaver. It's going to be a natural snow blowing machine around here when that wind gets underway. John Trabacchino, nice to see you on board. And it's pretty soon you're going to be ready for your winter weather up in Western Mass. As far as whatever happens with this storm going up, it's going to have to be in elevated areas that show up. I think the NAM picked up on it. I suppose it's possible that with some do-it-yourself cold air, you might see some wet snow up in the highest elevations up in the Adirondacks. But you just we don't really have that decent Canadian connection with this, as I said earlier. So, after this system goes by, and as we get later into the forecast period, I think we are going to have it a bit. Frank Toko 4, welcome. Thank you for being here. And by the way, those of you who are new, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's absolutely free, so you get notifications because we do these live streams almost every night. You're from Erie, Pennsylvania, one of the snow capitals in the Northeast. We'll be passing through here early tomorrow with rain and perhaps a thunder shower. Yes, it is. That's what it looks like for you. You get the cold front part of this. You don't get the stormy part of it. 39, dew point 32 in Williamstown, Mass. for John Trabacchino. Wait till we get to those times when your temperature is 9. You can get one of those cold air masses coming down. I know, Timothy. I forgot, but I finally did realize that I got that map up there. 99% of winters, says Steve LaPointe, don't start here in the tri-state area till the end of December, early January, and too early. Yeah, for the most part, you might. I kind of look for me. I always think like December 15th for me is my magical date, and anything after December 15th, I think your chances start to go up fairly rapidly. And of course, if you get the setup early in the season, especially for the coastal areas, you've got to deal with the warmer ocean. But that hasn't stopped big snowstorms from occurring in early and middle December before. So just bear that in mind. Climo works, except when it doesn't. So it's really important to respect climatology, but at the same time, recognize the fact that sometimes the weather setup is somewhere on the outside of the main envelope. I guess that's the best way to describe it. You know, your general weather is in a range from one extreme to the other, and sometimes you're in that lower end of the range where it's cold enough, and sometimes you're in that higher end of the range where the weather is very warm. Think back to December of 2016, for example, when we were dealing with that. I'm sorry, December of 14, December of 15, when we were dealing with that massive off-the-wall El Nino, which we do not have. Right now, we have no El Nino, we have no La Nina. Everything is kind of in a neutral state. Which is maybe something that will be a positive for snow lovers if it stays that way. If it's a little bit warmer than average on the water temperatures, that could actually also be bullish with regards to snowfall for this coming winter. But we're still in the kind of who knows with respect to this. Just really fast. Let me just see something here, and if it's worth showing, I will certainly do that. I didn't take a look. So hang on 1 second. Let's see. I'll look first. And okay, so here is your 384-hour North America snow map. Okay, just for laughs. All right, just for laughs. And we do actually, because of what, this the colder look and the trough in the east and the depth of that trough and the stronger ridge in the west, this is the 384-hour snowfall. So if you want to believe it, it would suggest that before the end of the month, some of the mountains of West Virginia, western Pennsylvania, parts of upstate New York, and northern New York and northern New England could see their first flakes. And of course, you see a more active snow pattern out to the west, if it's even real. We don't know that. And ample snows for Canada and on up into Alaska and Greenland. And if we're going to take a look at that, we might as well look at Asia, because we'll talk about Siberian snow cover. And it looks like, at least for the next couple of weeks, it looks like a fairly active snow period continues across Eurasia. So perhaps we'll get some strong numbers from the folks that follow the Siberian snow cover growth. We'll come back to that after we just did it a few days ago to look at the first 10 days. So we'll just wait till about October 22nd or 23rd, and then we'll look at the where we are in the middle part of the month of October. The people that follow that, and Dr. Judah Cohen, that's his big theory that he works on, watching the snow cover growth in Eurasia during the month of October as an indicator for the potential for cold and snow in the east. The rapidly growing years would suggest a colder and snowier winter in the eastern part of the United States. The problem with that is that apparently, you do have to kind of weigh that against whether you have an El Nino or a La Nina. Do you have Atlantic blocking or not? And I have said many times that I think that part of the equation is a bit overstated. You don't need blocking for sizable snowfalls or frequent snowfalls in the east. I would rather have the East Pacific Oscillation Indicator being strongly negative. I'd rather have that, and I'll take my chances with everything else with regards to cold and snow. Okay, so we're coming up on the top of the hour. We had a good hour-long live stream tonight, and thanks for those of you who have hung all the way through. Appreciate it. Izzy D and Steve LaPointe for hitting Super Chat tonight. Thank you very much. Thanks all of you for being here and taking the time for a late-night live stream. Usually I do them at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, but this week my schedule's been a little bit on the crazy side, but and it's actually still going to be a bit on the crazy side tomorrow, because I'm going to be working during the day tomorrow. So I might push my live stream up to 6 o'clock Eastern Time. rather than 7, so that I can then get on the road and get home. So I'll let you know, because I always try to schedule the live streams at least 1 to 2 hours beforehand, and then the chat board, of course, opens up so you can jump on board early if you like. So we will see you tomorrow. Pay attention to what the Weather Service does tomorrow with respect to any additional watches and warnings that may go up. And don't forget, if you haven't done so already, the App Store or Google Play, the Meteorologist Joe Chaffee app, which is absolutely free, and the Angry Ben Weather app, the Angry Weatherman. So you can have both of them. Ben Scott helps me with my website, nycweathernow.com. So if you got both apps, even better. All right, everybody, have a great evening. Thanks again, and we'll see you tomorrow.